Today's program is part of a new series that KEI is doing, a conversation with, as we're calling it. And we're looking forward to today's program as well as future programs as part of this series. And I'm sure I speak for everyone at KEI when I say we're all thrilled to have such a distinguished, knowledgeable speaker on the U.S.-Korea Alliance for today's program, General Skip Sharp. General Sharp served as the commander of U.S. Forces Korea, United Nations Command, and Combined Forces Command from 2008 to 2011. Just in case we get a little bit into the alphabet soup later, those acronyms are USFK, CFC, UNC, and CFC respectively. And he's now currently president of the Korea Defense Veterans Association. The last time General Sharp spoke for us at KEI was back in December, some of you might remember, when we were discussing many of the same issues that we had at that time on the SMA during a public program that we had at KEI. I wrote a paper for that event, and I was hoping it would have a pretty short shelf life, but fast forward 6 months later, here we are with a lot of the same issues that we're dealing with after the December 31st deadline has lapsed, and the United States and South Korea are still in negotiations over the SMA, and both sides still seem quite far apart. And General Sharp, I want to get us started on the conversation by tapping into your personal experience. You were commander of USFK during a previous SMA negotiation. I think it was the 8th, I believe. You weren't personally negotiating, as that responsibility falls to the State Department, but I'm sure you had a good understanding of the discussions at the time. Can you sort of compare and contrast your experiences at that time to the current talks for us?
Yeah, Kyle, first off, thanks to you and for KEI for having me on here today to discuss this important topic as we go through it. It's actually good to be able to put a sports coat back on and a fancy shirt, and as you can tell by the length of my hair, it's been quite a while since I've been able to do something along those lines, so I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, so I commanded in Korea from 2008 to 2011, and during that time period, we negotiated one of the burden sharing agreements. And back then, you know, there really was not a detailed ledger of who does what and the cost of, you know, what contributions are to either side. And the increases that came while I was there, and I think previous to that, and really even following that up into the most recent ones, has been mostly the increase has come based upon the defense, how much Korea increased their defense budget each year. I think it's some also on just inflation as it goes through. But now I think the big difference is, from what I've heard, and I think what we've all read, is that now we're going beyond just cost sharing. So it's more than just non-personnel stationing costs that President Trump and we have asked the Koreans that we're working together, looking more of a burden sharing. And I think there is a lot more detailed, if you will, Excel spreadsheet that lays out not only what the cost and the burden for the United States to be there, but also the cost of what Korea is doing, both in Korea and around the world, to help peace and security. So I've heard elements of that, you know, include how much Korea is spending on their defense budget, how much is coming to the U.S. for foreign military sales, the cost that Korea is carrying for, you know, fighting pirates off from Somalia and being UN peacekeeping missions around the world and such like that. So I think that's good. I hope we're able to come to some agreement on both what's on the ledger and then what is the amount that can be paid now and over time in order to equalize the burden as it goes through. My sense is we're getting closer. In one sense, in that at least both sides in the press have talked about numbers now, with the US being 1.3 billion and South Korea saying no, it should be more like 13%. I think the 1.3 billion is you know, on the order of magnitude of 40 to 50% increase since the last one. So in a sense, I think we're getting closer. But in another sense, since both governments have kind of officially, unofficially put out numbers, to close that gap of a couple $100 million may become very, very difficult for both sides to do. But I'm optimistic that we'll be able to push forward.
As am I, and I just want to bring up a housekeeping point before I move any further. I know some of you are already taking advantage of the questions in Zoom. But I would ask everyone if you have a question for General Sharp, just to please use it in. Please send the question in via the Q&A chat function within Zoom. But General Sharp, that was a very good broad overview of the differences now and then, and I just wanted to give further contextualize the situation for our listeners by looking at a little bit more at the previous SMA negotiation. So it started in '91, and then the second one was renegotiated, or was negotiated, excuse me, in '94. And then if you look at the different years from '91 all the way through 2014, it was negotiated every 2 or 3 years up until 2009, and then there was a 5-year gap, and then another 5-year agreement, and then we went back to where we are now, which is 2019. We had a 1-year agreement, and there was an 8.3% increase, which sort of falls in line with what happened before. But if you think back onto what was actually happening surrounding those negotiations, the U.S. initial ask was somewhere between 50 and 100%, and now we're again in the throes of this discussion. General Sharp, you mentioned the $1.3 billion ask, which is about a 50% increase from what South Koreans are paying right now. So if you look at where we're standing right now, from the South Koreans want a 13% increase all the way up to a 50% increase, that's sort of the range where I could see us going moving forward. There's really a lot of room left for both sides to close that gap in the remainder of the year. So I'll turn things back over now, though, to the questions. And I wanted to follow up by talking to you about the most tangible result from the agreement so far, or lack thereof, really, has been the furlough of thousands of Korean contractors working for USFK. From your experience serving as a commander of USFK, how important are these contractors to contributing to the readiness of U.S. forces stationed in Korea?
Yeah, they're very important. And as General Abrams, the current commander there, has said, it's a real shame that they had to be furloughed because of the legality of you have to furlough them. I do think there's over 9,000 of them, I think is the latest count, and about half of them have been furloughed. The other half are continuing to work and get paid because they have been deemed essential. And the combination of because the Korea pays for a small percentage of the labor cost as part of the burn sharing agreement, I think it's 20 or 30%. So some of that is able to come out of that. But the essential services continue. So the essential services such as running the fire departments, staffing of some of the hospitals that are there, healthcare, things in the order of safety and essential services, those Korean workers are able to continue. But about half of them, so over 4,000 of them, had to be furloughed. And again, those types of services now, the ones that have to be picked up are being picked up by soldiers that are over there to be able to accomplish them. So the labor that is brought by Korean laborers is very important. I'm sure that it is making the services much more difficult and maybe in some cases impossible to give that are non-essential services to our service members over there. And the other thing that's really shameful is those Korean workers really work hard, and they're great, outstanding employees and really work hard. And the fact that they have to be furloughed with no pay right now, although I guess the Korean government has just authorized some small amount for them to get paid out of the Korean budget during their furlough time. But still, they're not getting nearly what they would have been. Not being able to work is a real shame.
Well, it's good to hear that USFK is making do, but it's really unfortunate, as you mentioned, that these workers aren't able to continue to perform their vital jobs on the bases. And I really hope that they can get back to work soon. not only because of the SMA issue, but also COVID-19, which I know is impacting things on bases in Korea. You touched upon this earlier, but I kind of wanted to follow up and get a little bit more into, if you can elaborate a little bit more on the questions of South Korea's contributions and how they are really central to why there hasn't been a deal just yet. Can you tell us what sort of expenses this has traditionally entailed, and maybe what benefits could be left out, and how the U.S. is looking to expand the accounting in the relationship?
Yeah, so as I think most folks on here know, the Special Measures Agreement really has three different cost categories. The labor cost sharing, which is what we've been talking about for the Korean laborers that are on. Logistics cost sharing, which gets at helping maintain some of the facilities and our maintenance and war reserves and other things along those lines. And then also ROK funded construction, and this is construction of our billets, maintenance of our billets, building new facilities that are there. It's interesting because the negotiation that happened while I was there, the issue at the time wasn't so much how much was going to be paid, but in what fashion. And what I mean by that is, prior to the time I was there, all of the money for ROK-funded construction, actual money, came to the U.S. government. Then we used that money to design, to build, to do quality insurance and all of that, by paying contractors to be able to do that. At the time, the South Koreans wanted to do what's called in-kind contributions and had that count as part of the ROK-funded constructions. And just as the same as they do for the logistics cost sharing. And the negotiation went fine. We finally got agreement. And so right now for ROK-funded construction, the Koreans pay us in money for design and construction oversight. And then the Korean government directly pays Korean contractors to actually do the construction. So, that is, some of the changes that have happened over the years too. Now, the big change, I think, really started happening last year, during the negotiations last year. It's why it was only a one-year negotiation, or a negotiation that lasted 1 year, was because I guess this was like 2 years ago, because could not come to an agreement of what all should be included in the burden sharing. I named some of those. What I've been saying is that if we're going to go down that road of looking at, truly burdens that both countries are holding up, give some credit to what Korea is doing too, and do it, and what they're doing stability-wise around the world. Do it how much money they put into their defense budget, which buys U.S. goods, which is fantastic for interoperability and warfighting capability there. Count some of that in there too. And if you look at, it depends on how far you want to expand this, what Korea has done to help, recently with, for example, on the COVID, with masks and other things, to be able to send those to the United States. Just how far do you expand this? I personally don't think you need to go that far, but to be able to get at contributions to peace and security and defense, both on the Korean Peninsula and around the world, I think are good things to take a look at in determining this.
And I completely agree, and I hope those issues do come up in the course of these negotiations. And like I mentioned in December, I was thinking about the intangible values of deterrence and assurance, deterrence against North Korea and assurance with South Korea, that true presence on the peninsula brings us. And it's really a lot more value than just what we're talking about in terms of the tangible money amounts that are being discussed. And I hope that is really being considered and thought about. And as you mentioned, South Korea's role in the world, I don't necessarily know. I know that we think about allies sometimes as force multipliers, but I think South Korea, where it packs the most punches, and it's a values multiplier, where it really helps to fulfill the free and open values that the U.S. is trying to push, especially in the Asia Pacific. And there's a lot of room for us really to better incorporate the role that South Korea is playing in that regard. So I completely agree with your points. And I wanted to take us
Yeah,
back
to
to
that point, to that point that, I think they were the third largest contributor to forces in Iraq, only behind the U.S. and the U.K. They were in Afghanistan with us. They were the largest contributor in Vietnam. They're routinely in 7 or 8 UN peacekeeping missions around the world. As I said, they're fighting pirates off of Somalia right now. So I think a lot of times, even people here in Washington, D.C., even followers of Korea forget the contributions or don't understand the contributions that Korea has made and is continuing to make for, again, peace and stability around the world, to say nothing about the deterrent value against North Korea, which, yes, North Korea has been quiet in the sense of provocations. I think, this recent firing, or I think accidental discharge is, I think, what probably happened up there on the demilitarized zone recently. But there's announced that it looks like they may be, from what I read in a couple of papers this morning and have seen coming out, there may be a new sub that's going to be brought out. And certainly the conventional forces along the demilitarized zone, yes, there's been some pullback right at the DMZ, but all that artillery is still in the Quezon Heights. As far as we know, ballistic, nuclear building of nuclear capability is still ongoing. They are still violating all kinds of UN sanctions every time they shoot off a ballistic missile, even if it's a short-range ballistic missile that violates UN Security Council sanctions. So the deterrent value of the alliance is still very, very important to not just Korea, but to the United States also.
So a force multiplier and a values multiplier, South Korea really does contribute a lot. And I kind of want to bring us back to how the South Koreans perceive this SMA. I know we kind of can get carried away in Western and specifically US media. This issue isn't very as visible as it is in Korea. And this issue could get more visible in Korea as it becomes worse and the COVID-19 crisis ostensibly becomes better than it is getting in the United States. There's more attention on this, and more attention on it, potentially increases the opportunity for this to cause anti-Americanism, something that we saw in Korea in the late 90s and early 2000s. So far, there's been negative public opinion against the SMA, but that hasn't translated into anti-Americanism just yet. But there's always this possibility that it could. From your perspective, would the work of USFK get harder on a day-to-day basis if we start to see broad antipathy towards the U.S. like we saw back in the late 90s, early 2000s?
Yeah, I guess I don't see us going back to anything like that. The value that I think the great majority of people in South Korea see and the need for U.S. forces Korea there, and what we are doing to help both deterrence and be prepared to, as General Abrams would say, fight tonight. Koreans understand the importance of that. Yes, there are issues like the SMA that will kind of nip away a little bit at the alliance. There are issues such as, months ago, the intel sharing agreement with Japan had some potential real damage to be able to do it, but we work our way through these. And I'm confident that we'll work our way through this burden sharing agreement too. As I said a minute ago, the North Korea threat has not gone away. And yes, I understand, that President Moon wants to work more North-South relations, but he wants to do it within the context of also denuclearization. And that's what the people of South Korea want. They want a North Korea that's denuclearized, that does not threaten them in the future. And the importance of U.S. forces Korea there and the U.S. commitment in the ROK, the Republic of Korea-U.S. alliance is just absolutely critical to all that. And I think the great majority of South Korean people understand that.
Those are great points, and that's actually a great segue to my next question. Beyond the dollars and cents of the alliance, what other reforms and changes do you think the U.S. and Korea should be talking about to strengthen the alliance for the future?
Well, again, I'll hit back on intel sharing. I mean, the intel sharing agreement is still holding up between South Korea and Japan, but I think that could be increased. If you look at at deterrence, if you look at stability, it's really a Northeast Asia issue to include Japan. And so things to strengthen those intel sharing, I think, is important. I also think it's important to move forward with OPCON transition. I am a believer that that OPCON transition is the right thing to do for Korea when the time is right to be able to do it. So moving forward to be able to come to agreement with the terms of reference, the strategic directives, so that when the time is right and when a Korean general then becomes the commander of this combined forces command, still a binational command, still reporting to both nations, but with a Korean in charge, that will continue to strengthen the alliance. But as we move forward, we've got to there's still several gates that have to get through in order to be able to get to the point where future command structure and OPCON transition could take place. And that could be done in a way, and needs to be done in a way that strengthens the alliance and doesn't pull it apart.
I think those are all great points, and this is actually a natural transition, I think, here to the many, many questions that we've gotten from the audience. And I'll start off here from someone who you might know. He says you're a former classmate, Jeff McCausland, asking if you could spend a minute or two talking about the disappearance of Kim Jong-un and what might you think it suggests about what would the impact of regime change be on the security on the peninsula and on in the greater region.
Yeah. So you mean the fake news they're saying now?
Fake news could potentially be a black swan, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. The disappearance. We don't know obviously exactly what it is. My personal belief is that it was probably COVID related, and he wanted to get someplace safe and still be able to run anything. I think it was David Maxwell. If it wasn't, I apologize for quoting the wrong author. Wrote something recently that I thought was pretty interesting, in that if you combine COVID and lack of food and Kim Jong-un disappearing or dying, that's a lot for a country to absorb potentially all at once. Because I think there could be, all those put together as just a combination could be fairly moves North Korea to being very unstable. However, if they're not all put together and I'll say just Kim Jong-un dies, you can remember when his father died, everybody thought, oh, this young kid can never take over and all of that. It happened. His name is Kim, and it happened, and he took control. And I think there's been positioning already to get Kim Jong-un's sister prepared to do the same thing. Again, a Kim, and yes, a female rather than a male. But people have overestimated and predicted, the fall of North Korea for decades and decades, and they've been able to hold together. So I think it's going to take a combination of things for a great instability to happen in North Korea. And we may be at the point where something like that could potentially happen.
Definitely something to keep watching, even though it was fake news, as it turned out to be, as you mentioned. We've gotten a couple of questions here that sort of hit on the same issue, so I'll sort of not bundle them, but I'll try and mix them together to produce one question effectively about the United States position, either undercutting our leverage or shooting ourselves in the foot more or less by asking for such a high amount. And what opportunities does this give to adversaries like North Korea to try and decouple the alliance?
Well, negotiations have gone on for a long time, and negotiations are still ongoing. We've been able to work through this, and I think the alliance is still strong. I don't think the fabric of the alliance has been affected as this goes through. I don't think that North Korea has been able to take advantage of of how far apart we initially started and how far apart we are right now. Because I think the fundamentals of the alliance of deterrence and security and mutual benefit and values and all still hold strong. So I don't see this as an opportunity for North Korea or China or for others to really split the alliance up, yeah, at least where we are now in it.
The next question comes about is about the U.S. asking what role South Korea has to play in the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, especially regarding China. Does South Korea want to take up the responsibilities that the U.S. is asking, and are these potentially being discussed as part of the SMA?
I don't think they're being discussed as part of the SMA, but I do think that they are being discussed in other forums, because I do agree that that South Korea ought to be willing to support more of free and open Indo-Pacific region, and to be able to, if you will, officially sign on to being able to participate in some things along those lines. They're doing things, as we said, in other places. Yeah, I think that could be, back to your previous question, another way to continue to strengthen the alliance is to get more involvement of South Korea into the Indo-Pacific strategy.
Great. Another question we have comes from Donghyun Kim, a reporter from VOA Korean Service, who asks about the U.S. defense budget for 2020 will decrease due to COVID-19 relief efforts. Do you see any potential concern that this decrease in the U.S. defense budget will further put pressure on the SMA negotiations for South Korea to pay more?
It may be brought up, but I mean, the bigger issue is what are we going to be able to get for a defense budget? And given how much money has gone out to the stimulus packages and all, everything else, because we need to work our way through that. But I don't see it substantially affecting, or maybe even at all affecting, SMA negotiations.
One question that we have asks, how crucial are USROK military exercises in maintaining military posture against North Korea? When they get canceled or scaled down, does it significantly affect joint military posture? Yeah,
so this is Skip Sharp's personal opinion, that I think that scaling down and doing exercises in other ways does have an effect on readiness. I mean, General Abrams and General Brooks before him have said, that there are ways to do things that aren't so loud and so in your face, but we're still doing exercises and able to keep up our readiness. And I agree to that to a point. However, I do think that when you scale down or don't do some of the bigger exercises, the key resolves or the Ultimate Freedom Guardians, there is an effect there. And yes, you can do staff exercises, and I'm sure they are doing quiet staff exercises. But when you look at it, just the turnover of people, leaders in the major commands, not only in Combined Forces Command from the U.S. side, but from the South Korean side, it happens quite a bit. I mean, I was there as commander for 3 years. I had 3 Korean 4-star deputy commanders in those 3 years that I was there. Several different ministers of defense, several different chairmen. So it's not just the U.S. side that's rotating, it's the Korean side that's rotating also, and that happens all throughout the command. So when you don't do one of these exercises for, a year or so, there is an effect there, I believe. And, I don't know the details of what General Abrams and Brooks before me have been able to do with quieter, smaller staff exercises. But I put great value into the Combined Forces Command exercise program, both from a readiness and a deterrent perspective. So I would encourage and have that those types of exercises do need to continue, and again, both as a deterrent and as a readiness issue.
Well, thank you, General Sharp. We've run out of our allotted time. I know we can continue to talk about these issues, and I'm sure we'll hear more from you in the future as the SMA issue continues to progress, but hopefully we won't be talking to you for too much longer about this, and we'll get a deal reached sometime in the near future. But before we wrap up, I would like to alert everyone to a program that KEI is doing tomorrow. It's entitled North Korea, the Last Transition Economy. It's a program with several authors from the OECD about a recent report they put out on North Korea. It will be on Zoom tomorrow morning, Eastern Standard Time from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Less so focused on the security side, but more so on the economic side, sort of a broader understanding of the economics of what's going on in North Korea and what it would take to open and change and reform the economy. So I hope everyone can join us for that. And thank you once again to everyone for listening in, and especially to General Sharp. Your comments, your answers were all very insightful. Certainly given us a lot to talk about and think about as we move forward on the SMA issue.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to do it. And I'll just close by saying that I still firmly believe that the South Korea-U.S. alliance is the strongest alliance anywhere in the world. And we'll work our way through this burden sharing, but the values that South Korea and the United States share and what we're trying to do, not only in Northeast Asia, but around the world for peace and security, and doing it together are absolutely critical to both the United States and South Korea. And again, I remain optimistic because I've seen the strength of this alliance over decades and how well we are able to work together. And this will continue in the future. It takes work. It takes hard work every day to do it, but there's people out there working that. So thank you for the opportunity.
Well said, General, and we'll continue to look forward to what you have to say on this, as well as the work from KDVA. Thank you again, and have a great afternoon.
Okay.